Welcome, everyone. I'm Jerry Hans with Friends of Griffith Park, and this is the final results presentation for year 9 of the Los Angeles Raptor study. Friends of Griffith Park would like to extend a huge thank you to all the dedicated volunteers. 2025 was another record year for the number of volunteers we trained and connected to nests. We hope our new volunteers will come back next year now that you have some experience under your wings and likely have a better appreciation for our urban raptors. As this community science study grows, our more experienced returning volunteers have become invaluable. Seasoned volunteers help us identify new territories, find new nests, and solve the mysteries. And you know who you are, so you can take a bow, but actually wait until the Raptor volunteer dinner because we can't really see you right now. For myself personally, the challenges and detective work in the field is absolutely addicting. I also enjoy working with the new volunteers in the field to help them get a quick start. It's the collective power of the volunteers that allow us to record so much important data across a large study area. The Raptor study is a real standout among community science projects in our region and even well beyond. To the volunteers and to others tuned in here tonight for this presentation, please consider signing on as a volunteer for next year's study so we can keep the momentum going into the 10th year. Our team leaders, Dan and Narit, also need to be credited for the study's continued success. So let me introduce our LA Raptor study co-directors. Narit Katz is UCLA's first Chief Sustainability Officer. Narit is an environmental educator extraordinaire. She's an experienced animal rescuer and a solid photographer, as you'll see in the upcoming slides. She also serves as a member of the Los Angeles Board of Water and Power Commission. Narit attended Humboldt State University and went to UCLA for an MBA and a master's in public policy. And she's now making headway towards a PhD at UCLA. To top it off, she's highly organized and responsible, as most of the volunteers on the webinar here tonight will agree. Dan Cooper attended Harvard and UC Riverside and received his PhD at UCLA. Dan is Principal Conservation Biologist for RCD, the Resource Conservation District of Santa Monica Mountains. RCD is now a partner, in addition to Friends of Griffith Park, supporting the Los Angeles Raptor study. Dan is Friends of Griffith Park Scientific Director and has overseen quite a few surveys and scientific studies in Griffith Park, and they provide a solid basis for a nonprofit's advocacy and preservation work. An example of park science Dan has led includes the Griffith Park Connectivity Study, which was responsible for first confirming P22 back in 2012. Dan's work and experience in Griffith Park go back nearly 2 decades now, during which time I've had the privilege of knowing him. Tonight, we're going to encourage questions, and we'll address them after the presentation. Questions should go into the Q&A feature that you should see on the bottom of your screen. Adding your question along the way is a great idea if you'd like. So now I'll turn it over to Dan. And again, thank you all for coming tonight.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Jerry. Okay, as Jerry said, this is the summary of year 9 of the LA Raptor study. So most of you are returning volunteers, but some of you are new. So we'll go through the purpose of the study. As a reminder, we're looking at raptors as indicator species. We're trying to get a baseline data set of nesting raptors around LA. Our findings are helping minimize human-wildlife conflict while still allowing people to live their lives around LA. We're using the information from the Raptor study to inform management both in parks and also in the city generally with regard to street trees and even backyard trees. And we are in communication with other raptor biologists around the country and around the world who have their own raptor monitoring programs. Okay, so where's our study area? Well, our study area has expanded. So our first year, we were just focused on Griffith Park, which is that gray polygon in the middle. But every year we're expanding a little bit. And this year we really made a push down in South LA, coming all the way down to about the, well, Slauson Boulevard. And we even picked up some raptors farther south of there, Inglewood and Watts. We're also expanding a bit west of the area shown here this year, but we've put those nests in a separate category of analysis, and we'll really be treating just the area, the colored polygons you see here. So basically from Sepulveda Basin in the northwest, all the way down to the Museum of Natural History in the southeast, and up to the Arroyo Seco in the western part of Pasadena. All right, so let's review the species. Red-tailed hawk is our first one we'll focus on. And oh, maybe I should tell you something. I can't remember if I tell you something about the hawks during their photos or later. Well,
Sorry, I think before we get to the results, we're still in the overview of who we cover in the species and how we find nests and things like that. We save the results because we want to surprise everybody. So yeah.
well, I wasn't going to give you the results. So red-tailed hawk is our common large boodio, and it's has a red tail when it's an adult. I was thrilled today because I found a nest of it in a territory in El Sereno that we've been searching for since the beginning of the study, and I just happened to be on the right street today. Okay, so that's red tail. So then Cooper's hawk is another very common hawk we have. This is our common backyard hawk. When people say I have a hawk in my yard, it's almost always the Cooper's hawk. And then red-shouldered hawk is the same genus as red-tailed hawk. Behavior is pretty different. This is our loudest hawk. Here you see it screaming its head off. And if people say I hear a hawk in my neighborhood, it's probably the red-shouldered hawk. We are looking at great horned owls. We made a special effort to search for owl nests and territories and scour eBird and iNaturalist for records of duetting great horned owls in the last couple years. And so that's added a bunch of territories that we really weren't counting as part of the study, but they're bona fide territories around LA. So now we're, with the help of eBird and everyone else's sightings, not just our great volunteers, but just all the birders in LA, they are unwittingly helping us figure out the distribution of a lot of these birds. American kestrel, we had some exciting kestrel news this year. This is one of our rarest raptors, and we'll be talking about its plight a little later. It's a tiny little falcon. Peregrine falcon is our larger falcon, and it's pretty ubiquitous around the study area, but in very low numbers. And we're just learning about its habits. They're very hard to monitor because they nest way up in buildings and bridges and things like that. Barn owl is a species that was really a mystery to us. We had scattered sightings from places like Burbank, Mount Washington, Hollywood, and out toward Bayona. And we're finding that it could have its center of abundance in sort of that Culver City, Mar Vista area. So that's been really interesting to learn more about barn owls. Western screech owl is a great mystery to us as well. It's a strictly nocturnal owl, almost never seen during the day and almost never seen at night either. But we do have some examples of some backyard screech owls, which we'll share with you later, and even some idea of its center of abundance, which seems to be in walnut woodland in the areas where we have big patches of walnut woodland left. So that would be the north slope of the Santa Monica Mountains in Sherman Oaks, Studio City, also on Mount Washington, which still has some big old walnut trees that these owls are using for their nest cavities. Okay, so let's do a rundown of where we find raptors in Los Angeles. All right, so we find them in, and you'll recognize some of these photos from the training. We find them in both these wildland adjacent neighborhoods, like this is Sunstone Place up in at the south end of Sherman Oaks. We find them in some of the most urbanized areas of the study area. So this is the North Hollywood area, and very few trees, very few options, but we still have Cooper's hawks and even great horned owls in some of these areas. And then we find them right here. I'm sure a lot of you know this particular view, Wilshire Boulevard. You can actually barely see, but there is a red-tailed hawk nest on the ledge of that honeycomb-like building on the left that we found years ago, and it was active last couple years. Some of these urban birds are surprisingly hard to find, even though we see them flying around. You just have to know where to look. This is one on the MacArthur building, a beautiful Art Deco building just west of downtown. And of course, we do find them interacting with people a lot, like these young Cooper's hawks in the edge of a swimming pool. These nests are pretty densely scattered throughout the study area. It's hard to go a few blocks without crossing into the territory of one of our raptors. I mentioned using iNaturalist, and this is just an example of it. So iNaturalist is a great platform where people upload their photographs and their audio recordings, and you really never know what scientists on the other side of the world you might be interacting with or you might be helping out by your sighting. So in the case of red-shouldered hawk, I don't think we've ever just sort of found a new red-shouldered hawk territory with iNaturalist. But we have gotten some hints of where the nests are of territories we know about. But we found a lot of Cooper's hawk territories with iNaturalist. Sometimes we follow the hawks right into their nest tree, like this pair of red-tail that had their nest buried in this pine tree in Beverly Hills that we never would have found. And then sometimes it's quite obvious, like this one down in near Village Green in kind of the Culver City area. We provide our volunteers with these finger photos of one of us and our attractive hands and fingers pointing out at the hawk nest. In this case, this is an El Sereno nest near Huntington Drive. And you can clearly see it's a gigantic red-tailed hawk nest that's been active many years. Most of you were part of the fun this year as we trained up at the Crystal Springs Ranger Station area of Griffith Park. Okay, so let's get into some results. So in 2025, we rechecked or discovered over 750 raptor territories. Now that's what we have on the spreadsheet. It doesn't mean that all of these are active every year, but we have a lot of them active. And so this is just a rundown of how many territories we checked, broken down by species, and that we knew about. And so what you see in that increase over last year are new territories that we newly discovered this year. So we checked 251 Cooper's hawk territories. We only knew about 239 last year. So you can just read down the list, and it gives you an idea of the abundance of the different species. We'll get into the productivity and the activity later on. Okay, so this gives you an idea of the how many nests actually fledged young versus how many were active for each species. So redtail took a little dip in the number of active nests in 2025, but if you see with your eyeball that ratio of fledged to active nests, that remained pretty constant. So for one reason or another, not all the redtail nests last year were active this year. However, that ratio stayed the same. And then keeping with productivity, this is giving you an example of the average chick per nest, which is that red line, which looks like it might be declining a little bit. We're not really sure. Um, but the aggregate number of chicks produced this year was lower than last year. And that's really because we encountered fewer active nests. I will say that our data gets a little shaky before 2020, so it could be that that count, um, I would be more confident with those numbers from 2020 on in terms of that red line. So it's very likely that the average number of chick per nest isn't really dropping, it's kind of stable. But look at Cooper's hawk. So we had a drop with red-tailed hawk, but Cooper's hawk stayed pretty stable in 2025 with almost the identical number of active nests and almost the identical number of nests that fledged. And I should say now that I don't use these terms interchangeably. So active means there's a pair around interacting during breeding season. Um, Whether or not we find its nest, we know there's an active, or whether or not the nest fledges young, we know the pair is active, the territory is active. Fledge is actually young being produced from the nest. So it's a subtle distinction. You can read more detail in the report. But basically, Cooper's hawks didn't have that dip. And we have some theories for that, which we'll get into. Productivity, again, look at since 2020, it stayed really stable um, in terms of the number of chicks per nest. But the total number of chicks that we've been counting in the study area is increasing. Now, of course, the aggregate number of nests is also increasing. So we really don't know that. We can't say at least that Cooper's hawk is increasing or expanding in the study area, but it's certainly holding its own. And we keep discovering more nests um, each year. All right, red-shouldered hawk. Now, red-shouldered hawk is much less common, an order of magnitude less common than red-tailed hawk and Cooper's hawk, but it's still we're still finding new nests active every year, and this is encouraging because it means that it's probably not on the decline. However, the fact that there was a drop in the number of fledged nests in 2025, so that green bar dropped since 2024, which is a little bit concerning. It may be that for some reason they weren't finding enough food for their young, so they didn't raise as many young last year. We're not really sure. In terms of productivity, looks like it might be dipping a little in terms of the number of chicks per nest. And there you could see that definite drop in the total aggregate number of chicks with red-shouldered hawk this year. We had a number of nest failures with red-shouldered hawk, which you could read about in the report. Not a ton of them, but a handful. That may have been enough to pull that number down. Great horned owls had a similar dip. Now, interestingly, great horned owls don't build their own nests. They use the nests of other raptors and corvids like crows and ravens. And so those nests are not as easy to find. Looks like the total number of chicks per nest has stayed stable since 2020 at least. But again, we had that dip in the total number of owlets this year. All right, so let's get into the rarer raptors. So I mentioned the American kestrel. So this is this really fascinating story. Greg Slack is a birder photographer who works Betty Davis Park along the LA River in Burbank pretty hard. He's there almost every day taking photographs, and he started following this kestrel pair that seemed to really like this sycamore. And it seemed like they might be nesting, but they really didn't. He really couldn't confirm it. And it turns out they did end up nesting. And here's an example of the adult male bringing in a western fence lizard to the fledglings, which are there in that sycamore cavity. So we only had, I think, one or two other active territories of kestrels this year. Now, historically, these used to be the most common raptor in the LA area year round. But in recent years, recent decades, all those vacant lots that kestrels used to hunt in have gone away. And There may also be some competition with Cooper's hawks and other predators, other, raptor predators, because the places we see kestrels are these kind of like fairly disturbed areas along the LA River, including some areas where we don't have nesting Cooper's hawks. So there might be a connection there. This is this amazing shot of these barn owls, which we found, which volunteers found in Culver City. These nest in areas that you would just never dream something would be nesting in. These are the trimmed off fronds of a date palm, and the angle of the growth of these fronds when cut forms this perfect little ledge. And that ledge mimics whatever kind of barn, ledge or cliff ledge that barn owls like. And date palms have these gigantic trunks. They're not the fan palms, the Beverly Hills thin, tall palms. They're the shorter, squatter palms. And there's just something about that little ledge that barn owls love. And so we're kind of honing our eye toward where barn owls might be. And a lot of times we'll be searching underneath these date palms and find owl pellets and whitewash. And so that'll tip us off that there's a barn owl family active. And speaking of rare species, so this is this amazing western screech owl that fledged too young, and you could see those two little heads peeking up from that nest. This nest was installed by Scott Logan years ago in the backyard of a volunteer up at the right where Mulholland and Beverly Glen meet. There's some areas of walnut oak woodland in there on those slopes. And this couple's backyard is just a perfect little owl habitat tucked away. And sure enough, they've had screech owls nesting in this box. So that was really exciting because we really haven't confirmed an active nest of a screech owl in the 9 years of the study.
I will note before we move to the next slide that we had some Eagle Scouts who made some amazing nest boxes for us. So if you live in an area with walnut woodland, looking at you, Mount Washington, and you might be open to hosting a box at your house, let us know. Thanks.
Yep. Yep, we'll come over and invade your privacy, photograph your owls. Okay, so this is giving you an idea of the rate of territories fledged of the total active. And um, what can we say about this? These numbers converged last year, and we weren't really sure why, because there's really no good reason that they should be related to each other because they're different birds. But I'll just draw your eye to the difference between the green bar, the green line, and the purple line. And this is just saying that the that Cooper's hawk has overall a much higher rate of fledging each year than red-shouldered hawk. We just have a lot of red-shouldered hawks with nests with problems. They abandon their nests or the nests fail in some way. Whereas Cooper's hawks are just our super reliable hawks. I mean, and you may read in our report like we've had cases where a tree has been trimmed around a Cooper's hawk nest and they've still managed to fledge young. So they seem to be just super tough. We're really interested in looking at the rate of reoccupancy in these territories and the reuse rate in nests. And this is just gives you an idea of how these species differ. Red-tailed and red-shouldered hawk seem to be in pretty close sync. There's some play in the data, and the main thing is to focus from 2020 on. I should probably snip off the 2018 and 2019 data points, but a lot of territories of those two species get reoccupied year after year, whereas Cooper's hawks tend to move around so much that we find that it's really just 60% of Cooper's hawk territories are reused versus like 80% almost of red shoulder and red tail. And this is sort of a similar graph. This is how many territories fledged again from the prior year. So these were converging a bit this year in that all three species seem to have about 60% of their nests or their territories fledging again. So even though they're active, it doesn't or occupied, it doesn't necessarily mean they're fledging young. So we get this question all the time about the effects of rainfall and weather, and I decided to look at the species that I thought would be most impacted by rainfall, which is the red-tailed hawk. And the reason I picked this one is because red-tailed hawks a lot of the red-tailed hawk nests are in wildland areas, and they rely on things like ground squirrels and rabbits, which seem to be pretty affected by rainfall. You know, a good wet year means a lot of rodents and lagomorphs, rabbits. And so I started plotting this and I started noticing this interesting pattern where it looked like, and this is a little hard to see, but it looked like um, the single chick nests. So the green line peaked every time there was a dip in the prior year's rainfall. Now, most red-tailed hawk nests produce 2 or 3 young, but occasionally we'll get single chick nests. And we think that single chick nests may be an indication that there's not enough prey around. And so while this isn't really an exact type pattern, it did seem to happen on several of the years in our study. Now, there might also be an impact to the other end of the spectrum where if you have a really wet year, like an exceptionally wet year, like 2022 to 2023, that dotted red line peaked really high because it was so much more rainfall than usual. We also had a lot of single chick nests. So it might be that if you it's a Goldilocks effect, basically. Too little rain and too much rain are bad for red-tailed hawks. But it can't be too bad because the hawks, as a population, is just doing great all around LA. Okay, and at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Narit to talk about threats to urban raptors and the rest of the study.
Thanks, Dan. Just want to give some credit on the prior year rainfall. You know, Dan and I were talking about the impact of drought on our raptors, and it was actually in the research literature where we found some people had done studies on red-tailed hawk and I think golden eagle as well, where they found a link with the prior year rainfall and the impact on chick productivity. So
I think it was goshawk.
was it goshawk? Okay, thank you.
Goshawk.
I can try and share the link later, but just wanted to note that there have been some formal published papers on that kind of impact of drought on prey and then therefore nest productivity. And there's a number of other studies that just talk about that generally, how raptors adapt their clutch size based on prey availability. So unfortunately, life as an urban raptor can be pretty tough. So our raptors face a lot of threats in our city, including habitat degradation and loss, especially in terms of American kestrel, which, as Dan, was talking about, has become pretty rare and used to be a lot more common when some of the more open fields that they depend on were more widespread. Climate change and drought, we just talked about. Collisions, though, are one of the biggest threats. So in the literature, urban raptors are most impacted by building and vehicle collisions. And that's especially true. We've had collisions of all species. We have seen, mortality for great horned owl, probably swooping down to get prey and then getting hit on the road. Similar, we've rescued red-tailed hawks that were vehicle collisions. I think the building collisions are most common with Cooper's hawk. They tend to hunt in these really dense spaces, people's backyards, going after feeders, birds. And so they run into a lot of windows and buildings, especially the young Cooper's hawk we've had a lot of collisions with. Rodenticides, hopefully you've heard by now that rat poison stinks and you shouldn't use it. This was made famous by our late mountain lion P22, which was discovered by Friends of Griffith Park in a study that Dan led with Miguel and Aaron. Not only does rodenticide impact our mountain lions and our bobcats, but it also impacts our raptors. And so every deceased raptor that has come to our attention in the study was tested by Friends of Griffith Park, or most of them were tested through Friends of Griffith Park at UC Davis lab, and all tested positive for rodenticide. So again, that doesn't mean every single raptor was killed by rodenticides, but they all had rodenticides in their system, which is impacting them. And some of them, that was the cause of death. Construction disturbance can also be a problem, and this goes right along with tree trimming. So we do have some very urban adapted raptors. We actually even had a red-tail pair nesting on a construction crane this year. But many raptors are still nesting more in natural areas and more sensitive to disturbance. And even with our urban raptors, we have had nests fail due to filming activity or construction, and definitely tree trimming is a big issue. This is just an example of tree trimming disturbance from a prior year. This one was really heartbreaking. I had residents calling me in tears. Unfortunately, we found out about it too late. But this was a red-tailed hawk nest that had been in the neighborhood for over a decade. You know, the neighbors had gotten to know the hawks, had named them, and the landlord ordered tree trimming without kind of being present in the neighborhood and knowing what was going on. The tree trimmers claim it was an accident, but apparently they cut a branch that contained the nest. Thankfully, the young had fledged already. But one thing I've learned in our study, and has now been confirmed a lot, is that raptors tend to use their nest even after they've fledged for weeks at least, sometimes longer. So they will come back to the nest in the evening. Sometimes they'll sleep in the nest, and they'll definitely come back for dinner. So, you know, if you need to conduct tree trimming, it really needs to be outside the nesting season. And that doesn't mean like the day the babies fly out of the nest, you should trim the tree, because they're definitely still around. You can see up at the top, this was the red tail, sad and crying, and it was actually calling. I'm not anthropomorphizing, missing its nest when the young, you know, just a couple nights before that, I think I had been there and seen the young using it at dinner time. So it's a major issue, and we really appreciate your help spreading the word. It is illegal to remove an active nest of any kind, but especially raptors have some special protections. So if you do need to do any work, it should be at least 500 feet from a raptor. If possible, you should be working with a professional biologist or at least a wildlife trained arborist. This was just another example. This one hurt extra because we had just found the nest. This was last year. This had been a tough territory to solve. Dan found this nest. There's his finger photo. I went back to check it. I swear it was like a week after we found it, or 2 weeks later, and it had been trimmed out. So we do try to avoid these types of things by, one, collaborating with special training for arborists through Tree Care for Birds, and I can share some links in the chat a little later. But treecareforbirds.com is a really important resource you can share with homeowners, tree trimmers, etc. It's got a whole best practice guide. This is our former volunteer coordinator, Courtney, who helps with these workshops every year as well. And then, you know, signage can be helpful. This was a really cool example of a sign that we stumbled on. I was searching for a cuckoo's nest, found it actually through the whitewash and other signs, but then I walked around to the other side of the tree and saw that the arborist, in this case, West Coast arborist, had put up a sign to let people know why they weren't trimming this tree. So that was really great to see. We'd really like to see more of that around the city. Raptors do, as I mentioned, get into trouble. And when they do, we try to help, especially when it's a human cause. So we do come to the rescue. I volunteer with the Ojai Raptor Center and do transport, California Wildlife Center as well. This year, a notable rescue was one of our volunteers, Alec Thompson, who took these photos, saw a barn owl kind of bedraggled and drowning in the LA River. And we called our special ops, which is the LA Animal Services SMART team. This is Officer Navarro, who handled the rescue and came and was able to retrieve this barn owl and get it to a wildlife rehab center. So SMART has been an amazing group to work with, and they can really handle rescues beyond what we're able to. This was a great horned owl fledgling in, I believe, Jerry can correct me if I'm wrong. I think this one was near Green Oak, right? And so
that's Crystal Springs.
Oh, Crystal Springs. This was right inside the park. So sometimes our raptors, after leaving the nest, can get into a little bit of trouble by being in an area that's too populated or too busy. And in that case, they don't always need rescuing. And so it's always good to consult a professional if you're not sure. But sometimes they just need relocating. So in this case, He was put back up on a roof where he would be safer rather than on the ground. But sometimes they come out of the nest too early. So this is what a nestling looks like rather than a fledgling, meaning it should still be in the nest. And in that case, again, we call SMART. They come to the rescue and have all kinds of specialized equipment to help get the raptor back up in the tree where it belongs. So this shows, you know, these are kind of dense photos, but you can see the officer climbing the tree, and they generally have to climb the tree with the baby in a little cloth sack, and then they use that sack to place it in the nest, and it's really extraordinary. So we just want to give a big shout out to LA Animal Services and the SMART team. They've changed my life in a big way. Prior to having this close relationship with them, you know, we handled a lot of rescues ourselves, and now we're really able to just be more of the coordinator and not always have to be the ones to respond in the field, which is really great. So just as a review with raptors, this is what a fledgling versus a nestling looks like. With the fledglings, many people, and this goes for songbirds as well, many people find baby birds on the ground and they think they need rescuing and they steal them. And that's really bird napping. So again, if you're not sure, please call someone. I'll put my number in the chat. You're always welcome to call me, especially with raptors, but you always want to consult with a wildlife professional before taking a bird out of the field. So once birds are rescued, we coordinate with two main wildlife rescues, California Wildlife Center, which is out in Calabasas. They are fantastic and important for y'all to know about. So if you know you have other random wildlife that needs rescuing, they can't send someone out to you, but if you are able to safely help an injured animal, you can take it to them. I and others have on occasion resorted to Uber rides for injured wildlife. So you know, that can be a sort of last ditch way to get an injured animal to a rehab. But if you're able to transport, that's always ideal. And then Ojai Raptor Center is absolutely one of the top national raptor rehabilitation centers. OhioRaptorCenter.org. We have a close relationship and maybe getting closer. We might actually get to do a more public release of an owl in Griffith Park. So we'll keep you posted about that. You'll be able to, it'll be listed on the Friends of Griffith Park page, and I'll send it out to those of you who are volunteers as well. But they've been a wonderful partner. I've done a number of, they have rehabilitated many rescued raptors in our study, and then we've been able to release those back in the study area. So they're just an incredible organization, and we encourage you to support them along with Friends of Griffith Park. So what can you do to support raptors and wildlife in your yard? As I mentioned, don't use any rodenticides or poisons. Avoid trimming, removing trees or construction during nesting season. That's generally considered to be February through August. Honestly, great horned owls start early. You know, they're often incubating by like December. So there's not a lot of safe time in Southern California where you can be trimming your trees, maybe like September. But yeah, try to limit nesting season, construction, or tree trimming. And if you have to do it, have a biologist survey to make sure there's no nests that would be disturbed. This is more general and is more for the prey of the raptors, but avoiding leaf blowers and allowing leaf litter helps to support native insects, which then helps to support native birds, which then helps to support native predatory birds. So planting native plants, of course, helps to support our overall ecology in our urban areas. And then please, you know, educate your neighbors, share the study with them. There's a really great set of biodiversity guidelines that the city of LA has prepared, and I'll put a link to that in the chat as well later. If you're interested in getting started watching raptors, I know we have a lot of volunteers on the call, but we also have guests. So get yourself a pair of binoculars, and that allows you to get close to these birds at a safe distance. Most of the photos shared earlier were mine, some were from volunteers, but all were taken at a very safe distance using kind of super zoom cameras that allow you to be 100 feet from the bird and get a nice close view. And binoculars give you that nice close lookup. Our very own founder and co-director, Dan Cooper, reviews binoculars for Wired. And so if you look up the best binoculars for birds, nature, and the outdoors, you can get some of his recommendations. I think the Wired version still shows the Athlon, which he selected
it's
before.
Wirecutter.
Wirecutter, sorry, thank you.
I don't review binoculars for Wired. That would be weird, but an interesting review.
It's been a long day for both of us. Dan was teaching ornithology at Cal State Long Beach this morning, and I was downtown at City Hall working on Sepulveda Basin stuff. So, but yes, Wirecutter, and this year it was the Nikon Pro Staff that he thought were kind of the best bang for the buck. So, get yourself a pair of binoculars. Get on the apps. You know, Dan mentioned how scientists like us use community science data to do studies, and that's true more and more. So many different scientists are working with community science data and really making a big difference. There are studies that are discovering invasive species through community science data and able to like kind of get ahead of invasions. Lots of really cool stuff. So iNaturalist is fantastic and all species. eBird is nice for kind of tracking what birds you're seeing, and another good community science site. For ID, Merlin and BirdNet are great. And then there's a specialized app for Raptor ID called Raptor ID from Hawkwatch International. And it's great because it really shows you a lot of different photos and descriptions of the birds. And it gives you photos of what they look like from far away, flying up in the sky, which is how you will mostly see them. On that topic, there are some great field guides out there, including one called Hawks from Every Angle, which again tries to help you ID hawks the way you see them way up in the sky, unless you volunteer for our study, and then you get to see them more up close. We have an outreach image on our website that you can share that will kind of help us get tips. We've found a lot of nests this way, so you can share if you live in the study area, share on Nextdoor or Facebook and help us find nests. And then of course you can sign up to be a volunteer. So a lot more information is on our website, friendsofgriffithpark.org/raptor study. And as of an hour ago, our 2025 final report is also posted, where you can read in greater detail all about what we learned this year. So again, support of the LA Raptor study is provided by Friends of Griffith Park since 2017, and now we are in partnership with RCD of the Santa Monica Mountains. And with that, we will move to questions, and I'm going to go to the Q&A. I'll be reading out questions that folks have placed there, and we'll try to get to all of them. So thanks very much. And one of the questions that we started the evening with was actually whether you get to keep your nest. So from one of our volunteers, yes, generally we give priority to returning volunteers. So you should hopefully get to keep the nest that you monitored this year. And we will take other questions. I also learned at a risk of kind of being a little less organized here, we do have the ability to unmute people on the webinar. So if you're having trouble using the written Q&A for some reason, you can raise your hand and I can unmute you. One of our volunteers gave a shout out to the work that Dan and I have been doing, and Jerry, speaking at these Zone 0 related hearings for Board of Forestry. So for those who've spoken on Board of Forestry meetings, you know how it works. When it gets to you, we can unmute on our end. So this webinar format is similar, but written questions are great as well in the, again, in the Q&A. So let's see if we have some more now. Have you considered how crow and raven effects on nesting and behavior for raptors? Great question. I have lots to say, but maybe I'll let our founder speak first. Dan, would you like to talk about corvids?
No, go ahead. I know you think about this more than I do.
I do think about it a lot. So, you know, we often get concerned calls from the public and from our volunteers about what is actually called mobbing behavior. So this is where gangs or murders or whatever the collective noun is of crows and ravens will harass hawks. This is a very common behavior. Small birds can do it too. So you will have like mockingbirds mobbing or blackbirds mobbing raptors as well. So you can read about that. I'll drop a link later. So we do have some territorial conflicts, and you do see this kind of conflict behavior. It's common enough that sometimes people use corvids like crows and ravens to find raptors. So I was visiting Portland and wanted to see a barred owl for the first time, and someone had reported one in a park. I went to the park, I heard some pissed off crows, and I knew exactly that that would be where the owl was. And sure enough, there was a juvenile barred owl in the tree where they were yelling. So that's very common. But I will say they can also coexist. So particularly Cooper's hawks, but even actually all of our species, sometimes we find them really pretty close to raven nests. This year we had a great horned owl and raven nesting on the same side of a building at UCLA. We also had a great horned owl and raven on different sides of a structure in the valley, but still, again, quite close to each other. With great horned owls, of course, they were nesting in the raven's nest. So it's like they came in, took the raven's nest, and then the raven was like, okay, well, I'll rebuild close by. We've also had a lot of overlap with crow and Cooper's hawk territories, both in the city and in the valley. So much so that we've had to learn the difference between the whitewash, which those of you who are trained volunteers got to hear more than you ever wanted about that from me in our Cooper's hawk training. So anything you want to add, Jerry or Dan, on corvids?
I'll also add that they mob year round. So it's not just nesting. My students watched a kestrel just getting mobbed like crazy at Cal State Long Beach this morning. And fortunately, the kestrel was able to evade it and kind of like hide out in a eucalyptus, and the crows lost interest. But it's definitely an issue, especially in urban areas where crows are common. And interestingly, crows seem to attack raptors a little more than ravens in my experience, but in the hilly areas of the study area, it's pretty much all ravens. So Griffith Park has ravens and not crows, whereas the flats of LA, it's mostly crows with kind of a sprinkling of ravens.
And Dan, it's true that in some areas that are more wild, like in the desert, my understanding is ravens tend to make use more of utility poles and human structures, and then can have the increase in corvid population is having an impact on tortoises. And I
Right.
think maybe there's some Swainson conflict there. You would know more as our more experienced biologist. But sometimes the adaptability of corvids to human environments can really end up being kind of harmful to other species, or at least, crowding
Sure.
out to other species.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've
Um,
seen quite a few times red tails go up high in the sky and join ravens that are circling around. So it's not like
Interesting.
they, they try to avoid them.
Yeah. I should also note great horned owls are our top predator. These are all predators, but great horned owls are the predator of the predators, and they have been known to take hawks, even red-tailed hawks, and they do also eat crows and ravens. So we had a great horned owl nest at UCLA, and at the base of the nest found the remains of a Cooper's hawk. We don't know if it was the Cooper's hawk that had built that Cooper's hawk nest or not, or just one that was passing by, because we don't band our raptors. But it was pretty grisly, and there were also the remains of a raven there. So, all right. We have a question. So we got the raven one. Question about survey areas like King Gillette Ranch, Malibu Creek, and Topanga. Dan, what do we think about outside of the study area nests? Do we still want to hear about them?
Yeah, we actually have had a handful of volunteers monitor in King Gillette each year recently. And so, sure, I would say contact us next year. We can assign you one there. And if we get enough interest, particularly with RCD involved, and we cover the Santa Monica Mountains, that might be a good thing to kind of expand out our volunteer base there.
Yeah, we are slowly expanding a little bit west, and we do sometimes have little satellite mini areas. So
Yeah, we just kind of
we
test it
always
out to see if interest is
welcome Raptor info. So Yael asks, how can knowledge and experience about tree trimming in Zone 0 apply to saving raptors? Dan, or I'm happy to take this one too.
Yeah, thanks, y'all. So the Zone Zero, which some of you know about, is a new Board of Forestry requirement to clear vegetation within 5 feet of the house, and it's being negotiated right now. And I've been thinking about that a lot. You know, RCD has written a letter in support of more flexibility of keeping protected trees and other sensitive vegetation and irrigated plants in Zone Zero in certain cases. And I've been really curious about uh, thinking about its impacts in urban areas, especially very urban areas. So I think that if you look at where our raptors are nesting, um, we don't have a lot of them directly in zone zero or over houses, but we don't have none. And I'm thinking of some in Sherman Oaks,
Mhm.
and just there are cases where you have a giant pine tree over a house. Uh, I will say though that these raptors are seem to be like at least 9 years in, seem to be doing fine and adapting, which is good. And so, at least the common ones we're studying. I don't want to say that rare ones like barn owl and western screech owl and kestrel are doing great, um, but I also don't know that we have any of those in a zone zero of a house. So I think it's something to keep an eye on. It's something to keep in the back of your mind. Um, when
Yeah.
evaluating but off the top of my head, I wouldn't consider it to be a huge threat right now.
For raptors.
Raptors.
Yeah, and Dan gave a really great talk on the topic of fire resilient landscaping for a Theodore Payne event this week, and that will hopefully be on YouTube by next week. So keep an eye out for that. Alex Seifert, who is an amazing fire scientist, was also on that panel, as well as a fire landscaper, Cassie, and a leader from a fire safe council. So really, really excellent. Highly recommend, and you can learn more about it. The public comment period is still open for Zone Zero, so you can do public comments at bof.ca.gov and just Google Board of Forestry Zone Zero, and you'll find a lot more about it. I will say that a much bigger danger than the Zone Zero rules themselves is the current fear and misinformation when it comes to fire and trees. There's a lot of just unnecessary tree removal happening all over LA since the fires. People are just scared and not well informed and think that they can make their house safer by removing trees. And that's really unfortunate. And that is likely to have more of an effect on wildlife, just the overall excessive tree removal around LA. So on that topic, Harnawaz is asking, do you think the fires from January had an effect on raptor nest success and fledge status this year? I'll note that both fires were sort of outside our study area. We don't go all the way to Altadena and we don't go to the Palisades. But Dan, do you have any reflections on whether there could have been impacts?
Yeah, I haven't heard. I'd be curious to know. I did drive by the edge of the Palisade. Well, I kind of went through on Sunset a couple times this past spring, and during the cleanup, we had RCD had passes to get in for projects, and I did notice pairs of red tails where I'd seen them before, and the trees intact. So I think
Interesting.
they're going to weather it better than a lot of things.
Yeah, there definitely were raptors injured, though. I saw a singed great horned owl, in the Eaton fire, and I know that Pasadena Humane Society and California Wildlife Society both handled injured raptors from the fires. So I think if our study area had been in those areas, it would have been a huge impact. Um, I think it's most likely that those raptors, if their trees were gone, at least for red tails, what we've seen consistently is that when red tails lose a nest like that, they often take a year off. Coopers will sometimes relocate within the territory, but in a huge disturbance where like the whole neighborhood is burned, my guess would be those raptors were not nesting this year. I think they would have taken a break if they survived. So that would be my take. All right, let's keep going. So, Roshan says, I thought I saw a pair of fledged Cooper's hawks along with an adult about 10 days ago. Would they nest in midsummer, or what do you think of that observation? I don't know if Dan's waiting for me. I'm happy to chime in as the Cooper's lady.
Yeah,
I think
go ahead.
they probably were just still hanging out together. So our families of raptors do kind of hang out for a while, teaching their young how to hunt. So the Coopers definitely are all fledged by now, but some of them may still be traveling a little bit as a family. And there is a range of when they finish. So we have had some fairly late nests. So these could have been late fledges that are still hanging out with parents. So some fledge as early as probably June or July, but some do fledge quite a bit later. So yeah, probably just still hanging out. All right. Rebecca says, if our red tail nest remained empty this year, what do you think the chances are that they'll return next year? We do have reoccupation. Dan, do you want to
Yeah, I
speak to
think
that?
I think it's about 80%. So,
Yeah,
you
it's
know,
not zero.
it's not zero. Yeah. That's
Um,
it's a statistical brain teaser for any one nest. But yeah,
yeah.
the reoccupancy of red-tailed nest, I think, is about 80, almost 80%. And I know the nest you're talking about, Rebecca, and I'm surprised it wasn't active. Um, if the nest is still intact and you still see hawks around, I think the chances are pretty good it will be reoccupied. If
Although it might
nest,
be an owl.
yeah, or it might be an owl, right? If the nest is like half falling down and you don't see any birds around, then maybe
They
not.
might build a new one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I will
Yeah.
say we're still digging into the literature, but and I'm trying to remember the term, but I recently learned the term in the formal raptor literature for the breeding rate, which basically is not every year. So raptors do sometimes take a year off from breeding. And so, we don't actually know when we have these consistent red tail nests and they're missing for a year, what they're doing that year, or if it's a new pair or whatnot. But I do believe that for many of our species of raptors, they actually don't nest every single year and they do sometimes take a year off. So we definitely always recheck old nests. We even recheck nests if they've been absent for years because you just never know. And again, our great horned owls seem to be increasing and spreading out a bit more and getting more urban tolerant, although we don't have, formal study on that yet. But we have definitely found great horned owls occupying old forgotten raptor nests. So always good to check. Thanks. All right. Monica says, I found a great horned owl nest on private property that's not visible from the street. How best to handle this? Should the homeowner be contacted? Educating homeowners can help reduce trimming. Absolutely. So we actually have letters that we distribute to our volunteers that you can put in the mailbox that says, hey, you've got a raptor nest in your house. And it's got my contact info. So if you don't have that, email me. I'll put my email in the chat now and I'll be adding links and stuff later. But you can send me a note and I will send you a copy of that letter. And then that's a great way to notify the homeowner. If you're, kind of brave and want to meet strangers, you can always knock on someone's door and let them know, and educate them about the sort of the law and everything. So it's sort of, sometimes it's mixed for homeowners. Some people get really excited, having done a lot of this door knocking myself. Some people get really excited they have a hawk's nest. Others get a little disappointed because it limits what they can do in terms of trimming and tree removal. So again, if you don't feel like having that conversation, just pop the letter in and I'd be happy to talk with them. And then if it's not a nest that's already in our study, please let us know where and we can add it to the study, especially if it's something, oh, well, you said not visible from the street. So I don't know how you found it. If you know the homeowners, please do tell them. And yeah, let's talk. My email's in the chat. All right, Amy says, where do we find biologists to conduct nesting surveys? Dan, this one's for you.
So yeah, if you want to hire a biologist for a nesting survey, check the yellow pages. No, we're around. I do them all year round. I just got a call, but consulting firms sometimes offer them. I get a lot of referrals from the Audubon Society, so LA Audubon, if you call them, we'll go out and do them. Yep.
Great, thanks. All right. Marigan asks, did you see any, similar question that already got answered about effects from the wildfire. So no offense, but we're going to skip that one since we hit it already. What's being done, if anything, on the retailer level to reduce or eliminate rodenticide? Can this be outlawed? I'm going to give this one to Jerry because Friends of Griffith Park has been greatly involved in the laws around this.
Well, generally there's been great news on the anticoagulants, at least in California. The potent second generation products have been banned since early 2021, and then the first gens, difazanone, was banned in January 2024, and then the pest control companies started using another first generation rodenticide, and now it's also banned. So, it's like a decade of lobbying with many nonprofits across the state, and finally, all of the anticoagulants are removed from the market. Of course, unfortunately, you can go outside of the state, cross the border, and buy these agents pretty easily. So we suspect that some pest control companies are still using them, unfortunately, in bait boxes in residential areas. So there's been a lot of progress. Bromethylene, which is a neurotoxin, has is replacing really the anticoagulants locally, and of course it has its own issues because there's no antidotes, and pets and children are susceptible to it. So just
Yeah, thank you, Jerry. And for homes, you know, the snap traps are relatively humane and a good option, but UCLA is also, we've transitioned a lot of our campus to these electronic traps, which again, relatively humane because it's a fast death for the rats. And what's cool about them is they can actually notify you when they are triggered. So it's kind of better for tracking for a large institution. They're a little more expensive, but you know, if you care about the raptors and you're willing to do it, that's a great option. And then of course, raptors themselves are helpful control for rodents. You can learn a lot more at Raptors Are the Solution. So we'll drop that link in the chat as well. All right, so next question. Have you discovered a nest at the UCLA hospital and in Westwood? We do have a nest in Westwood area. We also have nests on the UCLA campus, not specifically at the hospital. So anonymous attendee, if you have a tip that's related to the UCLA hospital and Westwood, let us know. We have an unsolved peregrine falcon territory in Westwood. A lot of sightings of individual birds, no confirmed nest yet. So any intel on the Westwood peregrine pair would be very helpful as well.
We had an old nest of a red-tailed hawk on the hospital, the VA hospital.
Oh, the VA hospital. Yeah, sorry. I thought they meant the Westwood hospital, but good point. Yeah.
Yeah, so that was on a balcony of the VA hospital, which you could see from the 405 heading north if you look to your left, and it was removed. But at least one fledgling made it. Removed last year. The birds did not renest this year. There was one bird around, and the poor volunteer was dutifully chucking, but no dice. So we're hoping
Yeah.
that'll nest somewhere. There's a crane. I don't know if you guys have seen it. There's that crane that's been sitting there. So I've been checking the crane for
Who
it.
knows? Yeah. We definitely have been finding more and more structure nests for red tails, especially utility towers. So look up at your towers in your area. I'm going to take this question from Tessa, who says she used to have Cooper's hawks in her oak trees, but now they're all squirrel nests. Wonder why the raptors lost their territory to squirrels. So I would say it's not likely that they lost their territory to squirrels. Like they probably weren't chased out by squirrels because they will chase squirrels. It's more likely that they moved. So our Dan shared a little bit in the presentation about territory reuse, but when you look at nest site reuse, there's a big difference. And red tails tend to use the same site over and over again with very little moving around. Cooper's hawks often move year to year, especially in more disturbed areas or more urbanized areas. So we don't know if that's for predator avoidance or just part of their behavior for other reasons. They do have territory fidelity where they will stay in the same little quarter-mile area, but they will build a new nest sometimes yearly. So your Cooper's hawk may have just moved to a neighbor's tree and then the squirrels took over once it was gone. I'll also say that with Coopers especially, there is this tendency both of their nests to get used by squirrels once they've left them behind, but they also build their nests on top of squirrel nests. So you'll often see a Cooper's hawk nest with a very leafy bottom that likely was a prior squirrel nest. So there is a lot of mixing and matching there. All right. Brett asks, I've been seeing a couple of very vocal red-shouldered hawks around Betty Davis Park in Burbank in recent weeks. Do nesting pairs stay active together in their territory outside nesting season? Or do we think they're just rambunctious first-year hawks? What are the calls that are going on right now? Dan, do you want to venture a guess?
Yeah, Jerry and I were just talking about this before the webinar that pairs, well, first of all, our hawks are not migratory. So In the literature, there are populations of all these hawks that are migratory or semi-migratory, but ours are year-round, and the pairs stay in the territory year-round, and it's the young that then disperse. Um, we have actually two territories in that kind of Forest Lawn, Betty Davis stretch. So it could be that those are two adults, a pair, could be a couple juveniles. It's hard to say. But I'm seeing, yeah, daily uploads of red shoulders from that area on iNaturalist for sure.
Yeah, I'll also add, so our great horned owls definitely start courting now. September, October, you'll start to hear them calling to each other. And I have a pair of red-shouldered in my neighborhood. I've been hearing them lately, just the past week or so. So it's possible they also start calling to each other at this time of year. We don't know 100%. Dan, I wanted to ask, I know our red tails are non-migratory. Do we know for sure if our Coopers aren't? Because I know like our colleagues who do the Seattle Cooper Hawk study, they banded some Coopers and found them further down. Are our Coopers residential, or do we not know for sure if they're moving around a little during the
I guess we don't
breeding
know.
season?
I haven't heard any indication that they are, and
Do you
it's
think it's
just,
mostly the
but it doesn't
juveniles?
surprise me at the northern edge of their range, like up in Seattle. Though that's a pattern throughout a lot of birds that that for resident birds, there's like a northern tier of population that retracts south. So, it could be that it's just a different population.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that the bird from Seattle was found in Oakland. I suppose that one could have been a juvenile dispersal too. So yeah,
Which
just
disperse really far,
they
right?
do go pretty far. Yeah, Pete Bloom did a study with the red tails that found that the juveniles from Orange County went all the way up to Great Basin and then came back and nested near their natal territory. So
Yeah,
we're
and
still,
just to not go on forever about it, but I'm thinking I don't know that I've ever seen an adult Cooper's in LA away from a known territory. Like when we see odd ones, they tend to be streaky birds. So
it's usually the juveniles moving around.
yeah,
Yeah,
the
that's a good
juveniles
point.
moving around. Yeah. And if we do see one, it's almost certainly a clue that there's a territory we haven't nailed with a nest, and we go and we find the nest.
Yeah, thanks. All right. Monica is asking, do we have a list of trees that make the best homes for our LA Raptors? You know, we have been tracking the trees. I will say they like really big trees. So, you know, if you're thinking about planting trees, I would just go for the natives like oak or sycamore. When those get really big, they do get used by raptors. And they have all these other biodiversity benefits. But throughout our study area, they make use of non-native trees because that's what's there. So in the San Fernando Valley, they nest a lot in large ash trees. In the city, it's large ficus trees. But I wouldn't like make planting choices based on that because that's just what's matured over time. Dan, do you agree? Anything to
Yeah,
add there?
I don't think we can plant our way to raptor habitat, nor would we really want to. There's plenty of trees. These raptors that we're studying are not tree limited. It's probably more important to think about the rarer species like screech owl and to try to leave dead trees in your neighborhood and your yard as much as possible, understanding that there's concerns with insurance and fire and that. But the cavity nesters really need our help more than like the hawks nesting in a Canary Island pine, which are everywhere.
Yeah, I think for a number of our hawks, there is plenty of nesting habitat. I will say though, and this is, you know, backed up by studies from UCLA and others, that that is very varied around the city. So there are areas of the city that are very short of tree canopy. So overall in LA, plenty of habitat. But if you live in an area, South LA or, you know, other parts of the city that are more green space deprived, please do plant trees. Just know that the raptors are unlikely to nest in them for another like 40 years till they're big nests. But part of the whole point of planting trees, I think it was Henderson or somebody who said, you know, the meaning of life is planting a tree under whose shade you don't intend to sit. So it's all about the next generation, and that's the next generation of people and raptors. So please do, you know, continue to add to our urban forest, especially in areas that are tree deprived. But in the rest of the city that has a lot of trees, the bigger issue is tree maintenance. So again, not over trimming trees, making sure to water them so they're not dying. we have a lot of tree maintenance issues around the city, and we've been, working with colleagues and talking to the city about ways to support that. City of New York actually has a citizen pruners program where residents can get trained to take care of street trees. So we've been talking about some possibilities for LA for that. So yeah, more trees, definitely good. We do still have urban forest issues in LA. We got an FYI about great horned owls at the start of Los Leones Trail outside the study area, but good to know. Dan, I'm going to count on you to take a note because I'm deep in the Q&A here.
That's right. We actually have a old red-tailed hawk and a pine right at the start of Los Leones, so could be trading.
Yeah.
Okay.
Monica made a note about insurance companies threatening homeowners with cancellation of their policies and that leading to some tree removals. What's being done? That is a kind of bigger issue and longer question than we can handle in this Raptor session. But if you want to email me, my email's in the chat, and happy to send you a bit more information about this whole topic of fire safety insurance, all that kind of stuff. All right. Project Phoenix. We have a note from Project Phoenix, which is monitoring bird behavior and the impacts of smoke. Thank you for noting that. Since it's in the Q&A, I'm going to copy that over into the chat so everyone can see it and have the link to Project Phoenix. It's another great opportunity to sign up if you have a bird bath or feeder or want to help monitoring the impact of smoke on birds. So thank you for that. I have red tails flying over my house every day, but I don't know where the nest is. How far away could it be? Let's talk about red tail territories, Dan.
Yes, we're here for you. We experience this a lot. Depending on where it is, you can tell us your cross streets and we'll tell you. You may have a territory that we know about, or you may have a new one. I know where a lot of our volunteers live, but not all 300
Yeah,
of
please
them.
email us. Tell us where you're
Yeah,
seeing it.
tell us where it is. So, but the question is, how far do they travel? And I don't know that there's any consensus or
I mean,
trend
there's
with that.
estimates in the literature, but it seems to vary a lot by
Yeah.
habitat
Yeah, so
quality.
you could create an average number, and I could give you a number, but it's more that every territory is a little differently sized. So there are birds like our Koreatown bird that I showed you, that Mid Wilshire bird. I don't think it hunts more than a few city blocks, but then you have birds up at like Beverly Glen, Benedict Canyon, where it hits Mulholland, and I think I see those birds traveling that whole upper canyon. So, you know,
Yeah.
it's highly variable. But I will say that if you have a pair of birds over your house in the breeding season, you almost certainly could walk to its nest. So it's going to be
Yeah.
around.
It'll be close by. I
Yeah.
totally agree. Our nest territory density for red-tailed hawks is really varied. So we have these areas of the city with a lot of habitat that we call sort of hawk cities, where there's like a red-tail nest, visible from the next red-tail nest over. But then when you get into the more urban areas, the red tails are very distributed. And I'm going to be doing some research as part of my PhD, looking at the factors of the urban environment that matter for raptors. And as I was thinking about that, I happened to be staring at our map and thinking about our red tail nests. And it occurred to me that there is a very distinct pattern with our urban red tail nests. I think every single one is next to a ball field or a park where there is open space.
Yeah.
So our downtown nest that was on a crane is right across from Vista Hermosa and
Belmont Learning Center.
and yeah, the learning center there. We had that nest on Wilshire that Dan was talking about. There's a big grass field right there. We've got them at the basin, again, a big, open space area in the middle of the valley. So I think they're very dependent in the city on that open space. They can't hunt the backyards of dense areas in the same way that Coopers do. They really need a bit of open space where they can sit up there and then swoop down into the field. So it'll be interesting to see if the quantitative analysis bears that out. But
Yeah,
anecdotally, that seems to be the case.
As any of you attend sports events with your kids around LA, look up on the light fixtures, because we're finding nests in places we didn't expect to find them and didn't notice them before. I was just at Belvedere Park in East LA, and there's a nest there, and we can't get to every park in the city and every ball field. So keep sending us those tips.
Yeah. Dan Pierce notes that 2 great horned owl nests he monitored in 24 were blown away by high winds in 2025, and he wasn't able to relocate them. I feel your pain. That's always the worst. But asking, did we notice significant number of nests destroyed by winds? Jerry, I think you lost some in the park, and I know Jen Rose mentioned losing nests in her comments. Jerry or Dan, feel free to chime in. I think the short answer is yes, we did lose nests.
Yeah, we lost quite a few, and some pairs rebuilt, but others didn't. That sort of leads to another question, Dan. I'm wondering, do you get the sense that red-shouldered hawks are more sensitive to disturbances once after they start nesting?
Yeah, they seem to be sensitive birds in general. They seem to fail more. They're less common. Interestingly, they're more common. They seem to be a little more common than Cooper's hawks south of us, like Orange County and San Diego. So it could be that we're sort of at the little bit of an edge of range for them. Um, but yeah, and the other thing is about red shoulders, they tend in our area they tend to nest in these really big old woolly shaggy eucalyptus trees that have a lot of protection with shaggy bark and leaves and huge boughs and things like that. And they tend to put their nest right in the middle of those things as if they're finding like trying to find the most protective spot possible. And so it could be that that adaptation is in response to their delicateness. And so as we remove all these gigantic blue gum eucalyptus all over the city, which obviously for fire it's important to do, we may be kind of knocking out opportunities for that bird. Now, historically, they wouldn't have nested in that. They would have nested in a gigantic sycamore in a canyon, but obviously we don't have a lot of canyons left with those features. So yeah, it is kind of, it's informative kind of thinking about what these birds want to be doing and what they're making do with.
Thank you. All right, we have gotten to all the questions in the Q&A. Feel free to add more or put your hand up. I've added the tree care for birds, also our website in the chat, which now has the 2025 results posted. For those of you visiting tonight who aren't volunteers, you can also sign up to be a volunteer on that website. I also put an article in the chat from Audubon about mobbing behavior. So since someone was asking about corvids, and having had a long day, if anyone else can remember what I said I'd link in the chat, I'd be happy to add some of the other links. I was busy in the Q&A, but I know I promised 1 or 2 other sites. For our volunteers, we'll definitely send out some links afterwards, but anybody remember other things I said I was going to link?
You've done enough.
Okay.
You've done plenty.
All right. Well, thank you very much. We're about at time. So really appreciate you joining us tonight. We hope you learned something. As Dan and Jerry already said, we are so appreciative of our many volunteers. We had 300 something people volunteering this year. It's been incredible. We look forward to seeing those of you who can join at the volunteer appreciation dinner. And if you want to join the dinner in the future and you're not a volunteer, well, that's just one more reason to volunteer for the study. So thank you all very much. And Jerry, any parting words?
Yeah, just another thank you to all of our volunteers and to Dan and Nareed as well. And I should mention that Dan and Nareed will be attending the Raptor Research Foundation annual meeting in October, which is in Costa Rica. And both Dan and Nareed will be making independent presentations. Lucky me and my wife will be attending too. So thanks everyone for coming tonight and looking forward to Sunday with the volunteers.
Thanks, Jerry.
Night, everyone.
All right. Have a great night, everybody. And Jamie, I see your t-shirt question. Email me. And yeah, we will see many of you soon. Thanks again for joining us. Take care.
Night.